Oh hey, it's me, Onali from Clara's Canning, and today we're making bone broth. Cooking and canning with my grandma Clara at her little house in Rural City are some of the best memories I have. And now, I'm on a mission to preserve local food systems and traditions. By combining my lifetime of professional culinary and farming experience with generations of knowledge to bring you a fountain of skills and recipes to sustain and pass down. We are getting to the very bottom of food from the ground up, so I hope you'll join us. This is my super simple method for making bone broth that gels every time, and it doesn't take days and days. I've learned to make broth in a lot of different places, from the restaurants and butcher shops I've worked in over my career, and I gotta tell you, a lot of people out there are really overcomplicating it. Broth that gels the best is gonna come from items and bits that have the most connective tissues. So when we're picking bones for broth, we wanna look at things far beyond our normal scope, like feet, tails, necks, skin, a knuckle, or joint. So this is just pure connective tissue surrounding this bone, and then it's split, and that's just bone marrow right there. Wings, which are, yes, delicious for eating, but wings also make really excellent broth. This method works for pork, beef, lamb, or chicken. Today I'm gonna focus on beef and chicken. I keep my broth extremely simple to start because the more simple it starts, the more ways you can apply it later. So all we've done is wash these bones and get them set up on parchment lined trays. So we're gonna go ahead and roast these bones at 400 degrees for at least 25 minutes so that they're thoroughly browned. All right, we're just gonna throw these in the oven. So you might have noticed I didn't even season these with salt, and that was totally intentional because the less you do now, the more ways you can use it later. This broth could be used for a reduction sauce or a soup or a base for many other things, and if I season it too much now, by the time I'm done with that finished product, the whole thing could be over seasoned. Now that the bones are roasted, all we need to do is get them into our selected pressure cookers. You're either gonna need an Instant Pot or a stovetop pressure cooker. The trick that I learned from working with Justin Bazrach at Speedy Romeo in New York City is whether you have feet or not, you can get your chicken broth to gel every time by A, not adding too much water. Also, you wanna really bust up all of your joints before and just kind of beat them up a little bit before you get it into the pot. I'm using a knife I really don't care about. If you have a cleaver, be safe, don't do anything you're not comfortable with. You're gonna expose all of the cartilage and connective tissues in those joints that will lend itself so much better to the stock and make it gel. Oh yeah. So I always add all of my fat from the roasting process back into my broth because A, it's flavor, and B, this is a really excellent refinement process. All these little caramelized bits on here, you just really wring it out like a tube of toothpaste. So for the beef and the chicken, it's the same. I'm gonna make sure I get all of the fat from the roasting process in the pot with the bones. Some people really like to keep all of the fat on their broth, and that is totally cool. I will say this though, if you are making reduction sauces or anything with more fatty meat, like say you're gonna take this beef broth and then you're gonna add it to some ground beef and beans and make chili, these bones are super fatty. Ground beef is pretty fatty. So at the end of the day, you're gonna have a real thick layer, and I love my fats, don't get me wrong, but there is a time and a place to remove some of it from the top of the broth, and because we didn't add any salt or aromatics, all of the fat that you do end up skimming off this broth, if you want to, is completely usable as a cooking medium or something you can refine further for bath and body products. I always start stocks with cold water because my father, who was a carpenter and a builder, told me that hot water heaters are actually full of all kinds of crazy heavy metals and sediments and contaminants you really don't want to use in your cooking water. Washing dishes, washing hands, fine. But start with cold water when you're using it for cooking. The only way that I measure the water for the broth is by sight. I'm only going to add enough water to just barely cover the bones, and that's a good enough measurement for me. And sometimes I want to little jiggle them around, find them all a nice little resting spot in there. If you add too much water, the gelatin gets diluted, and the diluted gelatin is not going to gel. And I'm going to say this. People really go gaga for the gelling broth, but I will say broth that doesn't gel is still full of tons of nutrients. And sometimes I end up watering my broth down because, you know, say I make a really solid gelling stock and I get 4 quarts out of 4 pounds of bones, and the bones cost me around $8 a pound. That's like $8 a quart for the broth, which is like, I'm trying to get the most for my money, okay? For about 4 pounds of these beef knuckle bones, you can definitely get 4 quarts of really, really heavy duty gelling stock. I actually really like using an instant pot for my chicken broth because the pot is a smaller diameter, so I don't have to add as much water to get it to cover the bones. 1 carcass with all the bits is gonna make you about 2 to 3 quarts of broth. Now that I'm about there and I can see some space on the bottom of the pot and the bones and everything are almost covered, I'm just gonna kind of make them be covered instead of adding more water because I don't want to dilute this too much. Put the lid on, make sure the little toggle is at sealing. Pressure cook, pressure level. No, there we go. I'm still learning, okay? I'm not an Instant Pot aficionado. I've really only made broth in these. Anyways, high pressure. Stop it. Okay, start over. Pressure cook. High pressure, 2.5 hours for a chicken carcass. And that's it. With the stovetop pressure cooker, we're gonna leave the rocker off and we need to do what is called a vent steam, which is when the pressure builds up in the pot until this little doodad pops up. And that's when we can put this back on and start our timer. All right, the bone broth is now done. We allowed the pressure cookers to cool naturally and depressurize on their own. All we have to do is remove the bones and strain. The absolutely most respectful way to treat any animal that's given its life so that you may eat is to use every single part of it from start to finish. And yes, these bones still have a purpose. After pressure cooking for even 2 hours and 30 minutes, they are very, very brittle and fragile, and they crumble to almost nothing. So I am either going to scatter them in my garden, crush them up, or depending on the bone, I feed them to my dog. This is something that's going to be different for everybody. My dog is a big time meat eater. She's a hunter. She gets her own critters at times. So yes, you don't want to feed your dogs any type of bones that could shatter in large pieces, but these chicken bones basically turn to powder in my hand. And I know that Rosie's not going to have any trouble with that. But feed your dog as you like. All there is left to do now is strain our broth. I'm using a fine metal strainer. You can also use cheesecloth if you really want to refine every single tiny little bit of sediment out. But nutritionally speaking, a little bit of bone dust definitely doesn't hurt. We're going to do the exact same thing for the beef. I don't leave it in these big containers. I definitely don't put a lid on when it's this hot. I like to pour it into separate jars. I have this small finer mesh strainer that I just do as I get it into the jar. Leave the lids off and let these cool down to about 68 degrees before you put them in the fridge. Then secure a lid and get them in the fridge so that they can come down to 41 degrees within the first 4 hours. Don't put too many in your fridge at once while they're hot. So this is the chicken. And I've seen a lot of people say they have struggles getting their chicken broth to gel. Struggle no more. Call that chicken gel around here. Here's the beef. The beef got that good jiggle too. Okay. Yeah, see, we don't miss around here with this broth. That motion. Let's just listen to it for a second. And now we have our super gelled bone broth building blocks. And sure, you can enjoy these just as is, or you can add aromatics now to create a more complete stock, or use them as the building block for many other recipes like sauces, soups, and more. And stay tuned to our channel because we're gonna be using bone broth throughout many different recipes. What was that, Greta? You want them to like and subscribe?